Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. Apologies if you can hear crunching in the background. Chindy's over there chewing on a bone, so that might be in the background of this video. Again, apologies in advance. But anyway, today we're going to be continuing our discussion of the Edge of Spider-Geddon miniseries as we take a look at Edge of Spider-Geddon number 3. And, well, what Spidey will we be meeting today? Or, well, more specifically, what pair of Spideys will we be meeting? Yep, as I mentioned in the last video, today we're not going to be looking at just one Spidey, we're going to be looking at two. Specifically, we're going to be peeking into the world of Spider-Pete and Spider-Ben. Now, yeah, we have actually seen in previous Spider-Verse comics that there is an alternate version of Uncle Ben from a world where he wound up getting bitten by the spider instead of Peter, and likewise became that world's Spider-Man. But what if there was a world where both became Spider-Man and wound up using their powers to be a crime-fighting duo? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today, as today's universe has such a scenario. But does it play out well? Is this a cool, different interpretation of the tale of Spider-Man, or is this one of those stories that really should have just been tossed away into the forgettable issues of What If? Well, let's take a look and find out. So, what's the story? Well, I suppose I should probably give some clarifying details. The story for the comic is actually told in media res. In the present day, we actually focus on this world's Ben Parker after he just finished kicking the ass of a mugger who tried messing up a bar by the name of Stacy's. With, yes, the bartender being this world's version of George Stacy, who is not a cop, but is just a lowly bartender. Still, he's a cool guy, and he's thankful that Ben saved his store, saved his establishment. Which I find even more amusing is that after Ben does it, the guy is just webbed up to a bar stool and just kind of muffled screaming until Ben just knocks him in the head and knocks him out. But pretty much as a show of thanks, George asks Ben if he wants to talk about something, because apparently this isn't the first time that Ben has been to this bar, and usually he just kind of keeps to himself, and George can tell that something is kind of eating away at him. So he says that as a thank you, we might as well at least lend him an ear. So Ben starts kind of telling his story, and here's where we kind of learn more about how the story of this world operates. And so, much like in the main universe, there are some things that you may recognize. Like, for example, in this reality, like with the main universe, Peter Parker is an orphan who went to go live with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and at one point in time, he was bitten by a radioactive spider that gave him spider powers, which in turn, he used to go on to become Spider-Man. However, there are some differences between this version of the story and the main one. For example, in this reality, May is a Latina woman and speaks Spanish, which I guess again Peter is on his uncle's side because he doesn't really look Latino, and another thing, Peter's 13. He didn't get his powers when he was in high school, so he's still kind of a kid in this universe. Hold on one second. Sorry, Chindy was staring at me, and it appears she wanted to come up on the chair. So guess what? She's guest starring in this vlog. But anyway, like I said, in this reality, Peter was bitten by the spider when he was 13 years old, so he's still, for the most part, a kid. Just kind of doing his own thing, being chillax, and spending time watching videos on his phone. And yes, like in many other universes, he messes with J. Jonah Jameson. Although, because he's a kid, he also is kind of a spotlight hog. So there are times when he does this whole Spider-Man thing, just so that people will look at him and say, hey, what's that guy doing? Which, yeah, it's just typical kid stuff. But, in the case of his Uncle Ben and Aunt May, Uncle Ben and Aunt May, again, excuse me a sec. Sorry, again, dog stuff. But yeah, in the case of Peter's Aunt May and Uncle Ben, they are having their own problems. Specifically, Ben has health issues, and at the point when this story takes place, that those health issues kind of culminated with Ben kind of passing out on the subway, and so May and Ben wound up going to the doctors to try and figure out what happened to Ben, and well, but they don't say exactly what's wrong with him. It's not good, and so he kind of needs medication to help treat it. As such, after the doctor's visit, Ben and Peter go to the pharmacy, when they reach the pharmacy, Ben takes Peter's phone because it has his prescription on it, and he doesn't want Peter to go in with him. Most likely because he and May are trying to kind of shield Peter from what's going on with Ben, because in May's own words, they want him to be a kid a little while longer. a little longer. Of course, Peter's a little disappointed that he's just left outside the pharmacy without his phone, so he decides to go off and do some Spider-Man showing off as he suits up and then jumps on top of a billboard and starts dancing around for a crowd gathered outside. In the meantime, though, Ben is having trouble getting his medication, especially since apparently his insurance isn't showing up in the pharmacy's database, so all his insurance will really cover are pain medications, but not really none of the bigger stuff. As such, Ben kind of grumbles but accepts this, though as he tries closing up Peter's apps, he finds a video of Spider-Man as he's messing with Jonah Jameson, and, well, they don't say it, but it is kind of implied that the comments Spider-Man makes in the video, specifically about how Jameson's coffee tastes like, or smells like what is in his uncle's happy cabinet, does kind of get Ben suspicious, and sure enough, after he gets his pain meds, he goes outside, and, well, Peter's not done showing off as Spider-Man. So, of course, Ben goes to try and figure out where his nephew is, but it's here where another event in this universe where another event occurs that lines up with the main Marvel universe. Where you see as Uncle Ben starts looking for Peter, a mugger arrives out of the shadows and shoots Ben. Something that Peter immediately hears. Now, we don't see what happened in the aftermath of the shooting, but based on how Ben talks about the story, it's clear that he was hospitalized after the shooting. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't in good condition either, which is where Peter came in to help him. For you see, the best way to save Ben's life? A blood transfusion, and Peter was a good match. As such, they wound up transfusing some of Peter's blood into Ben, and sure enough, he was good as new, back on his feet, and was ready to hit the town again. But it's here that I need to remind you that this is Peter's blood from after he got his spider powers. And so, sure enough, once that blood was flowing through Ben's veins, it gave him spider powers too. And so, which we immediately see is when we cut back to Ben in flashback, we see that he's actually climbed up the walls of his house, which you can tell by blue paint marks because he had paint on his hands. And from there, based on clues most likely from the video, the spider powers, and even seeing a duffel bag hanging on an electrical pole, he starts to put two and two together and realizes that his nephew is Spider-Man. And so, he decides to do what any good uncle should do. Look out for his nephew. As from there, we cut ahead to later as we see Peter fighting an electrical supervillain and who wants to blow down a building that's being put up in the neighborhood. And while Peter tries his best to duke it out, the guy ends up shocking Peter off of him and kind of disorients him a little before the supervillain can launch a counterattack on Peter. That's when Ben arrives on the scene. As he's kind of made his own little Spider-Man outfit, which I'm only calling a Spider-Man outfit for the sake of simplicity. The only thing Spider-Man related about it is his mask, which is clearly just one of Peter's masks, which because the mask was made for a 13-year-old of mine, it's too small for him, so it only fits over the top of his head. The rest of the costume is literally just a full body onesie and gloves. So it's not really much of a superhero outfit. It's just there to conceal his identity. As such, he immediately arrives on the scene, and, well, he just says, okay, I can't think of a one-liner right now, but you know how this goes, let's trade fisticuffs. As such, a supervillain just runs up to Ben and starts beating the shit out of him, but once he's done, Peter's like, Ben's like, wait, I thought of something, lunchtime, here's your knuckle sandwich, before he returns the punches in kind and manages to knock the guy out. As such, from there, the supervillain is arrested, but based on news reports, we learn that this guy was actually a resident of the neighborhood, and part of the reason he was doing what he was doing was because big corporations like Oscorp and Stark were moving into the neighborhood and buying up the property, which, yeah, Ben isn't exactly okay with, but what he is also not okay with is Peter doing this on his own, because Peter could have died right there. After all, Ben is his uncle. He's his caretaker. He's his essential foster parent. Whatever. My point is, he may care about Peter, and they don't want anything bad happening to him. So he's kind of suspect of Peter even doing this at all. But Peter does have counters to both points. For one thing, while he did sympathize with the guy because the guy did exposit that was what he wanted to do, what his intentions were in Spanish, which Peter did understand, but at the same time, Peter wasn't just going to let him do whatever he wanted because, well, if he knocked a building down, someone could have gotten hurt, and regardless of how right or wrong his reasons were, Peter couldn't let that happen, so he did still need to be stopped. And then likewise, to answer why he's doing this despite the risks involved, well, it's because Peter knows that if he doesn't, someone could get hurt. And he even cites Ben as an example, because if it wasn't for Peter, Ben wouldn't be here right now. It was his blood transfusion that saved Peter, and even in Peter's own words, while he may be young, he's at least old enough to know that not everybody knows how much time they've got left. And as long as he has these powers, as long as he has these abilities, he wants to use them to do what's right, to help others, which can be done a lot better if he and his uncle work together. And so, his uncle kind of concedes to that, and from there, the pair do go on to become the ass-kicking crime fighters that we should know. As the comic immediately starts doing a montage of Peter and Ben as they're doing their whole spider duo thing, as they're fighting supervillains, swinging around the city, just sitting around, just chatting and shooting the shit, just exchanging names, giving out code names, with Peter even saying, "Hey," it's like, "Hey, so which one of us is actually going to be Spider-Man here?" And Ben's like, oh come on, Pete, you can't be serious." And Peter's like, "Oh, come on, I was Spider-Man first." Like, "You're 13, you're barely a man." So even Peter's like, "Well, how about I'm Spider-Pete and you're Spider-Ben?" And Ben's like, "What?" Was like, "Oh, come on, that's just like advertising who we are." It's like, "Oh, come on, there's like a million Peters and Bens around New York, and who knows who we are under these masks? We could be those people on the radio, Jimster and T-Bird. They wouldn't notice." And it's them just having fun, being nephew and uncle. It's actually, in a way, it's kind of amusing and wholesome and sweet. It's actually really nice. And even in the present day, as Ben is telling the story, even George Stacy's like, "Oh, so it really was all true. You guys are like a crime-fighting duo," and it's actually really nice. Nice. And even Ben remarks, "Yeah, it was a lot of fun until the day it wasn't." And we soon see that something bad did indeed happen in the past. What was that thing? Simple. Kraven's Last Hunt. So for those who are unfamiliar with the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline, this is how it went. Kraven the Hunter was dying, and so before he went, he wanted to do one final hurrah and wanted to just take down Spider-Man once and for all. And, well, he did, because he employed the one weapon he had never utilized in his entire long battle with Spider-Man. A rifle. He wound up shooting Spider-Man and then buried him. And while Spider-Man was buried, well, Kraven wound up donning a black suit of his own and going around acting like Spider-Man. His intent to essentially become the Spider and then show how much better he was at the job of it. As such, while Peter did recover because the wound wasn't fatal and even managed to dig himself out of the grave, well, by the time when Peter finally came back, Kraven had accomplished what he wanted, and so when Spider-Man came back, Kraven wound up shooting himself and well, died. Don't worry, he got better. But point is this: it's basically a famous storyline in both Kraven, and sadly, a similar event is happening in this reality. Only this time, the Spider-Man that Kraven is hunting is Ben. As we see in the Kravenov graveyard, which looks like a pet graveyard, we see a tombstone marked an itsy bitsy spider, as we can hear pounding coming from inside, and the one who ultimately breaks out is Ben Parker, who's clearly in a lot of pain, because you have to remember, while he may have spider powers that have improved his metabolism, he's still an old guy. So there are still some things that require more effort, and sadly, punching your way out of a grave despite enhanced strength, it does take a lot out of you, and we even see that he is kind of in pain as he clutches his chest. However, he still has enough in him to have some rage as he immediately just stomps towards the Kravenov Manor, finds Kraven, and proceeds to just beat the shit out of him over and over and over, continually just yelling, why, over and over. And while Kraven does meekly say, "Do you want me to tell you the answer, or do you just want to keep beating the shit out of me?" Ben just keeps beating him so hard that he eventually knocks him out. However, once Ben concludes this, that's when Peter enters the room, as he's a little groggy himself, as it turns out that Kraven, instead of killing Peter, wound up drugging him, so he's kind of out of it, and he's clearly had his own adventures off panel, including, in his own words, he fought a giant rat. I kind of wish I saw that. My point is this: he's not doing well. And while Ben is happy to see Peter, and Peter's happy to see Ben decides, "No, I can't let you do this anymore, Peter. This is not worth it. Not worth it. Like, what if something happened to you tonight? May needs you. You are done. You are finished being Spider-Man." To which Peter responds, "But wait, why do I finish? But what? Well, it sounds like you're making the decision for me. Why aren't you done?" To which Ben responds with, Ben responds with that because it's his responsibility to do this with Peter. Like, Peter is in their care. He's their nephew, essentially their adoptive child. He's not just going, he has to make sure that Peter is safe. And whether Peter likes it or not, he is May and Ben's responsibility. So he can't, so it ultimately is up to Ben to make these decisions for Peter. So just for the sake, if not for Peter's sake, if at least for May's, because May needs Peter, and he's not gonna let anything hurt her or Peter. So essentially, he's just telling Peter, you're throwing in the towel whether you want to or not. However, once that conversation is done, Peter notices the mangled form of Craven on the floor, and immediately his attention turns to him as he just like, well, oh my God, Ben, what did you do? As he picks Craven up, and Ben's like, wait, what are you doing? And Peter says he needs to go to a hospital. At which point he carries Craven off, and as he's going, Ben's like, Peter, he tried to kill me. But yeah, at that point, Peter's gone. He just leaves. And it's clear that whatever fun family dynamic that Peter and Ben had as their time as Spider-Man, it's kind of been thrown out the window. And it's kind of tragic. And even the present day, when Ben talks about how even after he lost Peter, he didn't tell May. You can tell it still hits hard. Though this also implies that something might have happened between then and now, which is why Ben is probably here solo. But I'll talk about that when I get to my thoughts on the story. But point is, Ben did admit that things did get a lot more serious at some point, and sure enough, we do see that there was a bit of follow-up, as when we get back to the story, we see that Ben did go to talk to Peter when they managed to get back to their house, and they're no longer in their Spidey jammies, they're back in their civilian clothes, and, well, Peter's just kind of lying in his room with his hoodie pulled up and tightened up as he's watching videos on his phone, and he's still clearly angry at his uncle, even telling him, I don't care how bad things would have gotten, I don't care what would have happened, I have never done what you did, and no matter how bad things would have gotten, I would have never done that. And he even goes on to say, we already almost lost you once, I don't want to lose you again. Which Ben sits on the bed, puts his hand on his nephew's shoulder, and says, I won't, kid. Not as long as you're here. It's honestly a really sweet moment. And from there, we cut back to the present day as Ben gets up, because throughout the whole story he had the phone he was carrying was almost dead, which, guess what? It's Peter's phone. It's Peter's phone, and throughout the story he was charging it, but now it's fully charged, so he's going off, and the bartender tells him that, aren't you going to take a rest or something? You take a rest or something? Even you need to sleep. You can't be Spider-Man forever. And to which Ben responds with, well, I'm old enough to know that no one knows how long they've got, and hey, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And sure enough, we see one last look at his phone, as we see that the screensaver on its cracked surface is a picture of Peter and Ben with the words Jimster and T-Bird underneath. It's kind of sweet, and I like it. So, my thoughts on this comic. So, as you can tell from the plot summary, and I did mention this when I talked about Edge of Spider-Geddon #1, this issue really does not have any major connections to Spider-Geddon beyond focusing on an alternate versions of Spider-Man. While there is a mention of Spider-Geddon at one point, as the bartender talks about all the various escapades that Peter and Ben went on, which does include Spider-Geddon, because when you read Spider-Geddon, you can find Peter and Ben in there. Well, ultimately, that's the only real connection to that overarching story. Otherwise, the rest of the comic is very self-contained in its universe without really any connection to Spider-Geddon. There's no alternate Spideys coming in and saying, we need your help, we gotta go save the Spideys of the multiverse, or all that crap. It's just a self-contained story focusing on these different versions of Spider-Man. But if I can list criticisms of the story first, one problem I genuinely have is how vague the story can get at times. There are a few things in the comic that are left unsaid, unspoken, and you're left to just sort of assume what has happened with certain parts of the story based on how the characters talk. Like, for example, when Ben got shot, it was a blood transfusion that saved his life. Well, he mentions a blood transfusion, we don't really see him in the hospital, and we're never told that it was Peter that provided the blood transfusion. You're only able to figure that out based based on what you can, based on kind of context clues and how I figured it out by reading it online, I think. But my point is, that's how it was figured out. That's how you figured it out. And there's also something, and even how Ben figures out that Peter is Spider-Man. While you can obviously assume he was able to kind of finalize the realization after he got his spider powers, beforehand, there was a hint, like I said, there was a hint that he might have figured out that Peter was Spider-Man based on the video that Peter had up on his phone of Peter and his spider jammies messing with Jonah. So in a way, that is something that I feel could have been applied better in the story. Like, there are a lot of things left unsaid. Even one other problem I have, we don't know what happened to Peter and May in this reality. Like, at all. Like, let me put it this way. In the present day, we are told that something, like, going to the flashback storyline, I mean, we're told that something had occurred with Peter and Ben that broke them up. And obviously what had happened was the whole incident with Kraven the Hunter, which did cause an emotional rift between them, but as we saw in the comic, that rift was kind of healed when Ben went to go talk to his nephew, and Peter just told him, look, I would have never gone that far, and I don't want to lose you again. And essentially Ben assured him that, yeah, as long as Peter was there, he wouldn't cross that line. It's honestly a very sweet moment it's honestly a really sweet moment, but in the present day, the way Ben and George talk, it's implied that Peter and May are gone. What happened to them? I have no idea. They talk about how Ben cheated death, so to speak, which the bartender could be referring to when Ben was shot, and then his life was saved by the blood transfusion Peter gave him, but we're never told that. That's not really confirmed, we don't really confirm whether that's a story. And the bartender even mentions how Ben stole all those years with May, and how he used to have Peter around. Again, the implication almost seems to be that something might have happened to Peter and May. Did they leave? Were they killed? Or is Peter back at the home and Ben was serious about his whole "you're not Spider-Man" thing anymore? I don't know. I have no idea. They don't actually clarify that. It's left up in the air, which, if I'm being honest, if the realization is that Peter and May are dead in this universe now, then I just gotta say, is it just like a curse with universes where Uncle Ben becomes Spider-Man? Is he doomed to have his family die? Because that's what happened with the previous Spider-Man from Earth 3145. His Peter and May got blown up by the Green Goblin. So why is it that this Ben also loses his nephew and wife, despite the fact that his nephew was a superhero along with him? Is it because the universe likes to just give the middle finger to Spider-Man? I don't know. Again, we're never told if that's the reason why. For all I know, maybe they're alive and well, and Ben has just been doing this solo for a while. But we are never told that. And so it's left up in the air, and quite frankly, I don't really care for that. While I do like some kind of open-endedness in a story, at the very least, the story itself needs to feel cohesive. To give an example, let me talk about the game Shadow of the Colossus. While that game is a very open-ended game that leaves a lot of its lore up to your imagination. You are told, like, the main character, Wander, goes to a valley and makes a deal with this weird demonic voice, in the voice that's named Dorman, that tells him that if he goes out and kills these 16 colossi, then Dorman can revive his girlfriend. Which that's the main plot of the game. But the thing is, the background of everything that goes on in the game is left up to your imagination, because it's implied that where the game takes place, this big valley, is cursed. That something happened in this valley a long time ago that made it so that no one can go back here. It was tied to Dorman, and as the game goes along, it's told that Dorman was sealed here, and part of his sealing involved the 16 colossi. But you're never outright told the events that happened prior to the game. It's all left to your imagination. And if you explore around the world, you can find clues to what happened, but again, you're never ever given outright answers. And I think it works in Shadow of the Colossus because ultimately, all those things are not the point of the game. The point is that you are a boy who wants to save your girlfriend, and the only way to do that are to find these 16 monsters that roam around the land and kill them. That is the main plot of the game, and that is what you need to focus on. It's not the backstory. It's not what led to the. It's not what led to. It's not. We're not told why Dorman is the way. Why Dorman is sealed away, or why the place is forbidden. All we know is that this guy just wants to save his girlfriend, and that's all we need to know. There's clearly something bigger going on in the behind the scenes, but but ultimately that stuff is not important. It does come back and tie into what's going on with you, but ultimately all you need to know is this place is forbidden and Dorman ain't exactly a good guy. But that is neither here nor there. Again, it works for that setting, but in terms of this comic, the less is more aspect, I think, does not work, because it feels like too many things are up in the air. You're not told you're not really given some clarifying details. It makes you wonder, well then what the hell happened? Why is Peter not around anymore? Is it because Ben laid down the law, or did something bad happen to him? Is his family dead, and now is he just going out and fighting the good fight because he feels he has nothing else left to do? Or is he just doing this because it is his duty and he wants to do right by Peter? I don't know. We're never told that, and quite frankly, I find that annoying. I don't like when stories just jump around and then imply towards things like that, because sometimes if it's too vague, then ultimately it feels like you're missing pieces of the story that you should really know. So I'm going to consider that a flaw of the comic. With that being said, though, I think this is honestly my favorite issue of Edge of Spider-Geddon. And part of it is because of the idea behind this. The idea of having Peter and Ben be a duo of spider-themed superheroes who go out and kick ass together is honestly not only badass, but in a way it's sort of wholesome. Because after all, in most iterations of the story, Uncle Ben is usually the sacrificial lamb whose death is what spurs Peter into accepting the whole "with great power there must also come great responsibility" mantra. But to have a universe where Ben is not only alive and well, but also fights alongside Peter and acts as kind of like his mentor figure as they both help each other out, I think it's nice. It's very awesome, and the way that they both fight crime and kick ass together, it's really cool. Especially when in the midst of battle, they're just shooting the shit. The montage, believe it or not, is kind of one of my favorite one of my favorite sequences in the comic, because we see Peter and Ben as they're just in the middle of all these crazy and mundane scenarios, and yet the conversation is still casual between them. When they're duking out with Mysterio, who's just casting them into illusions, Peter's like, "Hey, which one was a Spider-Man?" And then we see the conversation continue on as they're stopping for lunch, or when they're swinging through the city, or fighting ostriches with masks on their heads. I don't know. I don't know why that is a thing. But it's nice. It's wholesome. It's cool. And the way that the crime-fighting duo comes together, it's actually really nice. I like that Ben just comes in while Peter's in the middle of fighting a supervillain. And yeah, he has words to say for Peter, but he also realizes, oh, he's fighting a villain. Hold on, let me get into character, as he pulls on a mask and then just gets ready to throw his fist. And I love Ben's introduction. He's like, okay, I'm in the superhero game. I need a kick-ass one-liner. Shit, I'm drawing a blank. I think that's actually kind of amusing. And it isn't until he gets a few fists in the face and realizes, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Oh, now I got one. And then he delivers the one-liner and starts beating the guy out. That's fun. That's some nice superhero stuff. But what I also like but the thing is, not only does the connection feel wholesome, but I love how the learning aspect of this relationship. Because in this case, in this reality, Ben is the gruffer personality. In most other universes, Peter's the one with a nonchalant attitude who ultimately had to learn about power and responsibility through the death of his uncle. And for all I know, maybe it's a similar case with this world's Peter too. Maybe he adopted the Spider-Man identity not for the sake of helping others, but because he wanted attention, and it wasn't until his uncle was nearly killed that he thought, maybe I can actually do something good with these powers, especially since, like with many other universes, his uncle got shot while Peter was off doing something else, even though they should have been together. So maybe that could feed into it. But in the case of the story, Peter's in those, and what I think makes the story work is that it's Peter that inspires Ben. Ben is the one that's older and gruffer and thinks he knows how the world works. And in a way, when you are older and you've seen a lot of shit, you obviously can get a better idea of how things work in the world. But as I've kind of learned in my experiences on the web, age does not always equal experience, and sometimes you do need a bit of youthful exuberance to help you see things that you might have missed. And in the case of Peter, what he exemplifies is is Ben's morality, because after all, we see that because of Ben's gruffer exterior, he's more liable to occasionally fall into some dark places. With the example being Craven, and I'm not gonna say that what Ben did was completely unjustified, because let's be honest, I think a lot of people would do what Ben did in that scenario. He was buried, because for the love of God, Ben was buried alive, and just because Craven wanted to be Spider-Man. So yeah, I can kind of understand why Ben would be as angry as he was. But the thing is, he's still a superhero. And while Peter didn't knows that what Craven did was dangerous and could have led to him or Ben dying, Peter's main priority is never punish the bad guy, it's stop the bad guy. And if the bad guy targets us specifically, then we need to defend ourselves. And in the case, and when he sees what Ben does to Craven, his main priority is to get Craven to a hospital, despite the fact that his uncle was nearly killed, which in a way can be considered from a certain point of view selfish, but the counter argument is this: Peter is more concerned with helping people. He's not doing this because he has rage against someone. He's not doing this because he wants someone to suffer. He's doing this because he knows it's the right thing to do. And that if he does nothing, then someone could die. And which is why he reacts the way he does to Ben. Why he's angry at him when he nearly beats Craven into a smear on the floor. Because ultimately, while what Craven did was horrible, Peter and Ben are not judge, jury, and executioner. They're the Spider-Men. They're Jimster and T-Bird, as Peter called it. And ultimately that's not what they do. And the way that Ben goes to talk to Peter, knowing that he did disappoint him, and Peter tells him, we almost lost you once, I don't want to lose you again. It really does feel real. You can feel the tension in that moment. But ultimately, what makes it more wholesome is when Ben tells Peter that he won't lose him, not as long as he has Peter there. It's nice, and what I like is that it essentially gives Ben a reason to actually uphold that moral standard, because it's for his nephew. Because he knows that if his nephew is put in the same position, he would want to help people. He would risk his life, and that's part of the reason why I think Ben says what he says at the end of the story. Because regardless of what happened to Peter and May in this reality, Ben wants to uphold what Peter stood for as Spider-Man. It's why he's still out there fighting, why he's still doing what he does, and why he even tells the bartender no one knows how long they've got. Because he knows that if Peter was in his position, if Peter was still Spider-Man, he wouldn't stop fighting. Peter would keep going, and if Peter is truly dead in this continuity, he wants to do right by his memory, which I think is sweet, and it's exemplified by the fact that the background for his phone is a picture of him and Peter with the words Jimster and T-Bird underneath it. It's nice, and it makes me smile, and it showcases that if Peter truly is gone by that point, he's still with Ben, and it's Peter's memory that keeps urging Ben on. Unlike with the Spider-Ben of Earth 3145, who believed it was his own fault and who didn't need to be taught that lesson, as he was already the moral high ground for power and responsibility. This Ben needed that youthful look from Peter, who did have a more naive view of the world, and ultimately by looking at the world through Peter's eyes, it made him start to loosen up a bit, to be softer, and to be the Spider-Man that Peter would have wanted him to be. And it's nice. And that's, I think, the glue that holds this issue together. The family dynamic. The fact that Ben, despite how rough and angry he is, just wants to protect his nephew, wants him to be safe, be happy. It's why he fought crime side by side it's why he joined Peter and fought crime side by side with him. It's why he wanted Peter to give up the life when he thought he became too dangerous. And why when Peter was disappointed with him after he nearly killed Craven, that he told him it's okay. I know I'm not going to go that far again because I know you're here in the back. Because I know that if I almost fall, because if I fall into the darkness, you'll pull me back out. I like that. It's sweet, it's wholesome, it's kind, and it shows the bond that these two have formed as a family. And I love it. I love it. And while the story may not be perfect, it is those reasons alone are kind of why I think that this issue is probably my favorite of Edge of Spider-Geddon. It's nice, wholesome, a great premise, has honestly some really nice artwork. I love the designs for Peter and Ben, which let me see if I can find the designs for their costumes. Like, yeah, this is Peter's costume. I love how kind of simplistic it is. It's clearly still Spider-Man, but it's not as well designed as other costumes. It's kind of basic, kind of like how I drew a Spider-Man costume when I was a kid. But on the whole, it's nice. I like it. It's good. And overall, it's a good story. So on the whole, I think that issue 3 of Edge of Spider-Geddon is legitimately good. It has some flaws in the story and the pacing and how it goes, but overall, it's a great premise. Has a very wholesome dynamic between the main characters, and overall, it kind of it helps showcase the bond between family and how ultimately that can make us into better people. And we see that reflected with Peter and Ben perfectly, as ultimately they learn from each other and grow stronger together. Not just as Spider-Man, but as nephew and uncle. It's sweet and I love it. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I will hopefully see you on Friday as we read the final issue of Edge of Spider-Geddon, and see a world where Spider-Man is not Peter Parker, but Norman Osborn. So till then, I hope you have a good Thursday, and take care.